Welcome to the Gut Reset Summit. My name is Dr. John Dempster, and I'm your host for this summit. And I'm thrilled today to introduce you to Dr. Peter Kahn. And Dr. Kahn supports and manages clients with chronic conditions using a comprehensive approach by merging the exciting advances of functional neurology and functional medicine. Dr. Kahn is board certified in integrative medicine, functional medicine, and a board certified chiropractic neurologist. And he is the creator of the Neurometabolic Integration, a science-based virtual online coaching program that identifies the root cause of autoimmune and other chronic conditions. Over 5,000 clients from across the country have come to seek out this holistic approach, and that is changing the lives of those suffering from chronic conditions. And born in Taiwan and immigrated to America at the age of 13, Dr. Kahn has a deep appreciation of Eastern wisdom and Western advances in natural health care. And he believes in God-given ability of the body to heal and regulate itself. Welcome, Dr. Kahn. How are you today?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you're very welcome. It's great to be on another one of these summits together. And today I get to interview you. And I'm excited about that. And we have a very important topic that we're going to dive into. And I'm thrilled to be interviewing you on the topic of leaky gut. And really, we want to dive into this. We hear so much about leaky gut and how this impacts our health. And of course, this is the Gut Reset Summit. So there's nothing more pertinent to our gut than what's going on inside of our intestines. So tell me, what is this thing called leaky gut? We hear a lot about this. I think there's a lot of myths about it out there. There's all sorts of facts and truths that we're going to expose today too. But I want you to take it away. Tell the listeners today what's going on with leaky gut.
Right. Now, thank you for having me talk about this topic. This is something that I've been working with our clients for a long time. I say close to, approaching 2 decades. And leaky gut is a layman's term. The scientific term for this is called intestinal permeability. And what that implies is that your intestinal tract can be permeable, meaning certain things are able to get through the intestinal tract and get absorbed, and other things like poop and waste product are kept inside of the tube called your digestive tract so that you eliminate it from the other end. Now, know that intestinal permeability or leaky gut is actually something that's part of normal. And what I mean by that is we transiently go in and out of leaky gut. It's not something that you have, and then you have it, and then you take some supplements as if you duct taped it and you won't have it for the rest of your life. It's actually a transient state that we can go in and out of. The problem with leaky gut is when it happens on a more regular basis, on a more chronic basis. This is the reason why in the scientific literature, another term that it's leaky gut is called intestinal hyperpermeability. Rather than just permeability, it's too permeable. Right. So I want to make sure that the audience know that leaky gut is something that's part of normal. It goes in and out transiently. For example, if you had a night of poor sleep, you might have leaky gut just from that. But that doesn't mean it stays that way, because as soon as you get proper sleep and leaky gut kind of just gets better. And then next time you eat something really bad, fried food or whatever, you might have leaky gut from that. And then the next day you eat some vegetable and then you don't have leaky gut. So it can kind of come in and out. In fact, as babies, infants, they're born with leaky gut. And they actually have leaky gut up to about 1.5 years, 2 years of age until the gut becomes more, less permeable and become more permanently sealed. But even though you can still have transient problems. And the reason why babies are born with leaky gut is that so that they can easily absorb the immunoglobulins and immune factors given by their mother through the breast milk. This is how they build immunity. So again, leaky gut is part of normal, but definitely when it becomes chronic, when it becomes hyperpermeable, it can lead to a whole host of health problems and conditions and symptoms that can really be the root cause for many people as far as chronic disease and many chronic symptoms.
Absolutely. And this is why we're hosting this summit right now. It is about digestive issues and about healing if we have IBS or IBD, and healing from within to help that. But the gut is fundamental to every chronic condition. And in my opinion, it's the fundamental to optimal health and wellness. And so if we are dealing with any form of leaky gut, imperatively, it's going to be causing us to be a step or two or more behind on our healing journey. So one of the questions we get a lot, Peter, is what are the main causes that you see? I know it's quite at least in our clinic, we see all sorts of different triggers for it, but what are you commonly seeing as a big, major factors for triggering leaky gut?
That's a great question. First we have to know what causes it, because as I say, if leaky gut is transient, can come in and out, then what are the things that can cause it to kind of get stuck that way, so to speak, and doesn't, heal? And really, there's a whole host of factors that can be causes for leaky gut. One of the main causes will be dietary contributions, right? Because in the standard American diet or the North American diet, we eat things that are processed, that are man-made, that are laced with chemicals, hidden sugars or straight out sugar, fried food, trans fat food. These processed food in general are going to have a deleterious effect on our gut lining, specifically leading to leaky gut. So diet is a big factor. And, and it's also, diet's a very touchy subject, right? Not everybody are ready or willing to change the diet. But if you're on a healing journey and you have some chronic condition, and you tried everything else and you haven't changed your diet, this may be something that you want to consider, that it can cause problem. And research show that it definitely can cause problem. One of the things about food specifically is the topic of gluten. And gluten is a protein that's found in grains such as wheat, rye, barley, and other gluten-containing foods. And gluten is a known trigger for leaky gut. And so even in asymptomatic people, even if you have no symptoms per se, eating gluten can lead to leaky gut, which can predispose you to other symptoms that you may or may not feel necessarily at this time, but can develop into something down the line. For example, inflammation that can turn into arthritis, or can lead to other autoimmune disease in other places of the body other than the digestive tract. So an important thing to know is that people don't want to think leaky gut is just confined to the gut. Anything could be further from the truth. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. Leaky gut is a condition that doesn't just affect the gut itself. In fact, oftentimes it has extra intestinal manifestations, which means it affects other systems and organs and tissue in the body. So you might get joint pain, you might get brain fog, you might get hormonal issues and autoimmune disease of different types. So definitely do not think that leaky gut is just about gut symptoms. Now, back to triggers. What are some of the things that can cause leaky gut? We talked about diet, but certainly if you have gut dysbiosis, where you have an imbalance of the beneficial versus a harmful bacteria, or you get some food poisoning episode, you get, gastroenteritis, you get parasites, things that just go through you, that pathogen can be a cause for leaky gut as well. And finally, another thing that can cause leaky gut will be environmental toxins. Again, many of these toxins can be ingested through the process and chemical, latent foods that we eat, but also just things in the environment, such as, glyphosate and pesticides, such as just, plastic and fire retardant material. I mean, it's just so ubiquitous that we're basically surrounded by this toxic soup, that these chemicals all going to have an impact on our gut as well. So those are the big things I would look for: diet, toxins, infection. But I will go further to say that even blood sugar dysregulation, like if you have insulin resistance and diabetes, that's going to be a driver for leaky gut. If you have things like low thyroid function, that can be a driver for leaky gut, because when you have low thyroid, the metabolism of every single cell in your body slows down, including intestinal cells, so they can't regenerate themselves as well. That can lead to leaky gut. Even things like stress, if you have stress, that can also drive stress physiology, that can drive stress hormones, which are also going to have an impact on leaky gut. So those are the general categories of things that we look for when it comes to leaky gut. So it really comes down to really looking for the root cause of things.
Well, lots to unpack there, and thank you. Those are massive, massive nuggets. Now, I want to come back to one of the original buckets there that we were sort of starting to tap into, and that's of food. And gluten is obviously notorious and quite nefarious when it comes to a lot of digestive issues and beyond, including autoimmunity. But what are some other foods that are often triggers for leaky gut? Are you seeing any patterns in general? And also, a general question on top of that would be, how do we know if food is bugging us? Are you testing for these foods? Do you recommend people to get tested? Do you listen to your body in certain ways? What do you recommend, Peter?
Yeah, and there's no one size fits all approach. I think it all depends on where the person's coming from, how far are they willing to invest, into doing testing and so forth. But as far as other foods, I find that, again, gluten is a very common trigger. Dairy is often can be cross-reactive. So we know that gluten can, there are other food that can cross-react with gluten, meaning if you're sensitive to other foods such as, say, rice or quinoa, these foods can potentially cross-react. So if you are sensitive to rice, if you have that sensitivity, that potentially that rice sensitivity can cross-react with gluten and trigger a gluten reaction, even though you haven't ate gluten. So that's a concept of cross-reactivity. And dairy is known to do that. Soy, corn, rice, quinoa, there's a list of gluten cross-reactive foods. So we don't want to just think about just gluten. It's other food as well. But in general, if you're eating more processed food, then that's going to be more problematic just simply because the way the foods are processed. By the way, in the North America, in the United States in particular, gluten are often deamidated. And deamidation is a process where they use enzymes to make gluten more gluey and more malleable so they can shape the chicken nugget into the shape of like Mickey Mouse and stuff like that. That gluey enzyme that makes this gluten more malleable and formable, it makes the gluten much more reactive to the human body. So that's also another problem why we want to eat as much of the whole unprocessed food. And then I mentioned earlier blood sugar, and people think like food, but remember sugar is food as well. So if you're eating food that has a lot of, just straight up simple sugar or high fructose corn syrup, or just eating a lot of refined carbohydrate, right? Where they starch, but they just turn into simple sugar right away because they're just white starch. These things going to impact your insulin in a way that's going to promote insulin resistance. That's going to lead to high blood sugar. Not high blood sugar and insulin resistance going to create glycation, which is the damage caused by blood sugar. And that's very inflammatory for the gut. So I think people a lot of times just focus on, okay, I got to cut out this specific food, but don't forget about just sugar intake in general and minding the blood sugar stability. Lastly, I want to speak about food is some people are very sensitive to a group of compounds called lectins. Okay, not everybody is equal amount sensitive to lectins. Some people are very sensitive to all the different kinds of lectin, and some people are not. But in people who are sensitive to lectins, lectin can be a trigger for leaky gut. Now, lectin can be found in almost all plants. So it's not like you can cut out all lectins. One way to cut out all lectin will be to just eat all meat. And some people actually do that. It's called a carnivore diet, where they just eat only meat, and they'll actually feel better if they actually have problem with just lectins in general. Now, that's very extreme. I'm not saying everybody should do that, but I'm just pointing out that lectin can be a problem. So then that kind of leads into your next question is how do we test for these things? How do we know? Well, there's two ways to know. You can either do an elimination diet and just cut out these things and see how you feel. If you cut out these things and you feel better, then that means those things may be potentially a problem. And then you see how you do, and then gradually you can introduce it back and see how you do. So that's a process that you can do this yourself. The other way to do it is just by running food sensitivity testing. Now, one of the interesting things that I found clinically, John, is that if people have very profound leaky gut and they're very sensitive, to everything in the environment because they have leaky gut, and that's one of the things about leaky gut is that it can promote just this overzealousness of your immune system. Then they may be finding themselves sensitive to a whole host of foods. And if we do food sensitivity tests on someone like that, you might see that they're sensitive to every food. So then what do we do then? Cut out every food? Well, that's not a solution to the problem because you got to eat, right? So sometimes I don't do the food sensitivity test right up front. I rather do a leaky gut test to identify whether this person has leaky gut and how severe it is, and then go ahead and fix that. And if they still have problem, then I might follow up with a food sensitivity test to see what still remains. So that's a clinical strategy that I employ to not waste time and money doing the test that might just show that this person's sensitive to everything. And I ended up stressing the person out because now they can't eat anything because they got to follow the test because they may have problem with all those foods, not because of the food themselves, but because they have a leaky gut condition that's not healed yet.
So great points. Now, a couple of things I want to dive into on those points. One is you've mentioned testing for leaky gut. I want to understand a little bit more if patients or people that are looking to get some information right now in terms of what tests they should be asking their doctor. What do you recommend for that? And my follow-up to that is, are you able to test for lectin sensitivity, or is that also a process of elimination diet type of strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. So first is the test for leaky gut. Now, I have a lot of patients that come to me say, hey, I went to all the GI doctors and they tested everything. I say in quotes. They tested everything and they say, I don't have any problems. Well, oftentimes they do not test for leaky gut because leaky gut is not a test that's done by medical doctors per se, unless they're practicing functional medicine. And so they say, oh, I had colonoscopy and endoscopy. They say everything's fine. Well, colonoscopy and endoscopy does not test for leaky gut because leaky gut is happening on a cellular level. And colonoscopy and endoscopy is a gross, eye exam. Basically they stick a camera down there and they're looking at what the camera can see, which is basically you're looking for polyps, you're looking for a tumor, you're looking for a bleed. But beyond that, they can't see things that are microscopic, right? Unless they take a biopsy, then they can look for like H. pylori or they can do some kind of test like that. But still, there's no medical test for leaky gut. Leaky gut test is a functional medicine test because we're looking for dysfunction rather than a disease, right? Because if you wait till you have a disease, it's already too late. What we're looking for is pre-disease states. And that's what leaky gut is. It's a transient state that you go in and out of. But if you get stuck in a hyperpermeability, then that becomes a problem. So is there a test for that? Yes. There's been tests for that for many decades. Recently, it has evolved to where we're testing antibodies against the intestinal tight junction proteins, such as occludin, zonulin, and actomyosin, and even lipopolysaccharide antibody. Previous to that, we were doing lactulose mannitol tests where you drink a sugar solution, and then some of these sugars are large enough to, are too large that shouldn't leak out the intestinal lining. So then if we're picking that up in a urine test, then that means that you probably have leaky gut because the large sugar is leaking out. That's the old test. The new test is much more sensitive because we can actually quantify it better. Again, it's measuring antibody to zonulin, occludin, antibody to actomyosin, which is a smooth muscle tissue, and antibody to lipopolysaccharide, which is a toxin produced by gram-negative bacteria that's very large, that shouldn't cross the intestinal tight junction. So if it's crossing the tight junction, that means it's leaking out the intestinal tract, and that includes the occludin, zonulin, and actomyosin. If these things are leaking out the intestinal tract into the circulation, then your immune system will make antibody against these fragments in an attempt to clean it up. And the more antibody, that means the more of these fragments are leaking out, which indicates more severity. So we can actually document this and then also do retests as we do intervention to see if people are getting better. Now, on the topic of lectin, yes, now we have tests for lectin as well. You can run a lectin panel to check if you have reaction to a specific type of lectins. And even if you just do a regular food sensitivity test, you can kind of gain some information from that. For example, if you see reaction against tomatoes and white potatoes and bell peppers, and well, those are pretty high lectin containing foods. So typically lectin is going to be found to be in high contents in things like nightshade vegetables, grains, and legumes, although other foods can contain it as well. And some people have a very specific lectin sensitivity to a specific food, and while other people are just kind of sensitive to lectins in general. So there's many ways to skin the cat. You can either eliminate and see how you do, or you can do these tests and kind of figure out what's going on. But for me, the starting point, John, is always leaky gut, right? I start there and we want to make sure we're stabilizing that. And as people are improving, then we can go on and look at other parts of the body and further improve that.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important that we do look at data and that we leverage the technology and the testing that's available. But at the same time, common sense always applies, and we have to listen to our body. We have to understand what the signals are that our body's often giving us, and we can learn a lot just by staying in tune and understanding how things react. But that's what gets a little tricky with foods, because those reactions are not always like an allergic reaction where they're immediate. They can be delayed. And they can be delayed by up to a number of days after that consumption of that food. So, we've had, as I'm sure you have, numerous patients come in and say, "Oh, I'm not reactive to any foods." I would know, but then when we actually do the proper elimination diet or the proper testing that's available, that can really dive in and provide much deeper information that can really change the course of somebody's treatment and help them tremendously. So that's enormous. One other thing, again, I'm trying to keep up with you. You're throwing out so many nuggets here of gold. I love it. We touched very quickly on toxins and how that impacts leaky gut. Can you go back to that for me for a sec and just unpack that a little bit, Peter? And what toxins are we referring to? What are some of the common ones that we should all be considering?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, different toxins can impact the gut in different ways. Some toxins are very, toxic and cause a lot of inflammation within the gut, while other toxins are more impacting other systems. Like, some toxins are immunotoxic, where it suppresses the immune system. Some toxins are, neurotoxins and really cause a lot of neurological symptoms. But all toxins going to have some impact on the gut, because especially if you're ingesting it, it's going through your GI tract. It's going to serve as an irritant to the GI tract. And when you irritate the GI tract, what you're doing is you're eliciting a cytokine response. So basically, various type of immune cells are going to release these chemicals to signal, oh my gosh, we're under attack. Let's call in our helpers. So you got more immune system rushing to the area, which is going to cause more inflammation. And that inflammation is going to have this collateral damage effect of creating tissue destruction. Now you have damage, actomyosin or glutazonin or other things that's going to start happening. And now you're going to start to have this inflammatory cascade. Now, one of the toxins that's very commonly associated with GI problems is actually glyphosate. And glyphosate is a active ingredient found in Roundup, a common, lawn herbicide, but it's also used in commercial agriculture as well. Now, glyphosate is a chemical that's known to inhibit what's called the shikimate pathway. The shikimate pathway is a biochemical pathway within organisms, bacteria and plants and so forth, that basically when you block that pathway, the organism does not survive. Now, the argument by the manufacturer of glyphosate is that, hey, this glyphosate inhibit this shikimate pathway, which is only existing in bacteria and plants, but does not exist in mammals or humans, so it does not hurt humans. Well, that's true, but turns out you have bacteria in your gut called your microbiome, part of your beneficial flora. And the glyphosate can inhibit the shikimate pathway in those gut bacteria, which are your friends. So then that can start to damage your gut microbiome. And when you damage your gut microbiome, it's going to have a deleterious effect on your gut and potentially lead to leaky gut. The reason is because the gut bacteria, the gut microbiome, maintains a very delicate balance. And when you start to lose too much of the beneficial bacteria, it's going to create an opportunistic growth of the negative bacteria. And then that can start to kind of tilt the balance where your immune system have to fight more bad guys than good guys. And then that's going to lead to this condition of dysbiosis, which is, and then the inflammation, and away you go with more leaky gut being created. So this is a very common problem for people that have gut microbiome issues. It's also very common for people to have a lot of glyphosate exposure or other toxin exposure that can damage the gut microbiome. So, one of the things that we look at as far as healing leaky gut is how can we restore the gut microbiome? And we can do tests to identify whether there's a problem, or we can do specific interventions with nutritional supplements or dietary interventions to help with the gut microbiome. And oftentimes that has a big impact on the overall gut health.
Let's touch on the microbiome for a moment. I think this is really key. And, there's trillions of organisms in our gut at all times. And a lot of them are good, but we can at times host, non-beneficial and even pathogenic, which are disease-causing bugs. What are the ones that you're commonly seeing, whether it's through some of the testing that you're doing or whatnot? What are you commonly seeing as a massive irritant to that intestinal lining?
Yeah, as far as pathogens, when we're doing testing, just so you know, that stool testing, well, let me just back up. None of the lab tests are perfect, right? They give us a glimpse into what's going on inside the body. None of them are perfect. That doesn't mean they're not useful. We just have to understand the limitations. With GI stool testing, we're just going to pick up whatever came out in your stool. Mm-hmm. Sometimes a bug is just kind of stuck in a spot. It doesn't come out with your poop, so we can't measure it. But what I do see on the lab test is that oftentimes I'm seeing people having a lot of dysbiotic growth, which means that they have these bacteria that are normally there, but they're not normally there present in large populations. They're supposed to be just kind of small players. But when you have lost this balance between the various species in the gut due to toxins or blood sugar problem or other reasons, then you're going to have an overgrowth of these bacteria that are normal in small population now growing in large populations. Some of the common ones that I see are things like Pseudomonas and Klebsiella. These bacteria, by the way, are also known to produce biofilm. And biofilm is basically a thick, sticky mucus that the bacteria, when they colonize, they can produce this mucus to basically encase themselves in it and become a protection for them. So then your immune system can't kill them. Antibiotic may not be able to get rid of all of them. So then you get this antibiotic resistant type of situations. So these bacteria can be there on a chronic basis. So a lot of times when we do stool tests, we see it on the test, but who knows how long they've been there? We don't know unless we have previous tests and follow them serially. We don't know how long they've had it. So sometimes they say they have a history of just chronic GI problems, and every time they take antibiotic, it works for a little bit, but then it comes back. And then we see on the test, you have these pathogens. Then we say, okay, perhaps there's a biofilm issue, because you can't directly test for biofilm. It's a clinical suspicion based on the pattern of how they respond to antibiotics and previous treatment and the type of species that they have. So then in that case, we might employ some biofilm disrupting enzyme along with antimicrobials so that we can get deeper and get rid of these pathogens that may be really chronic. So those are some of the chronic things that I see. Do I see candida sometimes? Sometimes, not as much as I see these dysbiotic growth on the stool test. Okay, and I'm specifically speaking about stool test because in reality, in vivo, right, in the person's body, there may be at any time a bunch of other pathogens or infection that they have that just didn't get picked up on the stool test. But just from the stool test, the most common thing I see is dysbiotic bacteria, candida. We see them sometimes. Parasite, seldomly seen on stool tests, but again, protozoas and amoebas and parasites many times can be present in the system, but just didn't get picked up. So that's something that we have to be aware of as well.
Yeah, no, great points. And that's the thing. Again, common sense prevails. These tools, these tests, they're helpful. They can really be a game changer, but we still have to use our intelligence and apply that. And if we are suspicious of parasites, yet the parasite panel's coming out clean, sometimes we still treat that, and it can be very helpful. And I'm sure you do the same. But thank you. I'm going to quickly tangent to a question I've been dying to get to as well. Is we hear a lot about the gut and the immune system, but specifically, and I know this is a very important topic to you, is the autoimmune pandemic, if you will, that we're seeing right now. We have over 200 autoimmune conditions that are diagnosable. In your clinic, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of it. We are seeing a lot of it here. What's the connection to leaky gut and this autoimmune bombardment that that we're witnessing right now?
Yeah, definitely. Autoimmune is on the rise. More higher incidence, more people having it, and leaky gut is one of those things that can be a predisposing factor for autoimmune. Now, I'm not going to say every single person with autoimmune have leaky gut, but I would say many do. Okay, and in research is very clearly stated by Dr. Alessio Fasano, who's one of the leading researchers of gluten sensitivity, who's the person that actually discovered leaky gut. And we think he's going to win the Nobel Prize for his discovery, his work on leaky gut and gluten. And in his paper, he specifically says that leaky gut is a predisposing factor for autoimmune disease. That means if you have leaky gut, you're much more likely to develop autoimmune disease. The reason for that is because when you have leaky gut, you have food dietary proteins, you have bacterial endotoxins and pathogens that can and various other toxins can just simply leak out of the gut lining. When these things leak out of the gut lining, remember your gut is supposed to be a protective tube so that junk and poo stays in the gut so that you poop it out the other end. If it leaks through the intestinal tract prematurely, that's going to present to the immune system a big signal that something is wrong. And your immune system is going to develop antibody and various innate immune response to basically try to attack these things that are leaking out of the gut. And that's going to drive this immune system overreaction, which includes the production of more antibodies. And what happens is sometimes you can have cell tissue that's floating around. And that cell tissue may get, if your immune system is already overzealous, it's going to increase the probability that cell tissue gets picked up by the immune system, by your antigen presenting cells, take it to the lymph node and present it to the B cells, and you're going to develop antibody. You can potentially have a match for an antibody for that cell tissue. And that's going to be the start of autoimmune disease. Now, of course, autoimmune comes in stages, right? You can have a pre-autoimmune state where you have antibodies, but you don't have symptom. We call that silent autoimmunity. But then it can develop into autoimmune reaction where you have antibodies and you have symptom, but not enough tissue destruction to be called an autoimmune disease. This is where most people come to you and I looking for answers. And then if they don't find, the proper help in time, then they progress to having, frank autoimmune disease. This is where people with celiac disease will have the villus atrophy, right? But by then they would have had years of that process happening until they got to villus atrophy. But that's the point at which it's medically diagnosable. Well, who in their right mind want to wait till it's medically diagnosable when you could do something way before it's become that point? So this is where the work that we do in functional medicine is to look for the root cause, look for early stage of these things, and correcting these imbalances before they become full-fledged problems. And that's really important for people to understand, because these gut problems oftentimes, again, like I said earlier, it doesn't show up as a gut problem. And I was going to say this again, leaky gut often doesn't come with gut symptoms. Mm-hmm. So you can't just say that, oh, my tummy feels fine, so I don't have leaky gut. Not necessarily, because leaky gut can manifest simply as inflammation, like you just have joint pain, you're achy. It can manifest simply as brain fog. You just feel like you have short-term memory and you can't remember things. It can manifest simply as like Hashimoto's or some other autoimmune disease that have nothing to do with the gut. Although it can produce gut symptom as well, but it doesn't have to. So you can't use that as a way to tell whether you have a gut problem. And this is the reason why when people come to our office with chronic illness, we're asking questions. We're asking, okay, is there potential for leaky gut? Because if you have brain symptoms, if you have inflammation, if you have, joint problems, it can all be linked to leaky gut. And therefore, we have to ask questions and do the proper diagnostic and address it if that's the case.
It's so fundamental to begin in the gut, and the leaky gut, if it's there, we need to treat it. But you totally brought me back to a memory when you mentioned Dr. Fasano. He was obviously a legend in the space of gluten and autoimmunity. I had the very fortunate privilege to see him speak at Harvard, and I'll never forget this. He said, look, if you have somebody who is suspicious of having autoimmunity, you don't need to test them for gluten. You need to get them off of gluten. And he's that confident that, and again, it's not the only factor here, but he's that confident in how gluten can impair the immune response and be a factor for autoimmunity. So I wanted to share that with you, and you just totally brought me back to that. So thank you for bringing that up about Dr. Fasano today. He is so important. His research is well recognized by many, but it should be on the forefront, in my opinion. And that would be amazing if he could be, nominated for the Nobel.
Absolutely.
So we touched on a lot of the triggers, and we've even touched on what leaky gut can lead to. Now, tell me, Dr. Khan, how do we fix it? What do we do to heal leaky gut?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? And that's what we all strive to do, because it's such a big problem, and therefore, it's a big focus of ours. As far as how to fix it, I think it's always about, for me, it's about identifying whether that's happening. And unfortunately, with current available technology and lab tests, we can find out how severe it is. Again, the severity of the leaky gut does not necessarily translate to the severity of the symptom, because you can have symptoms in other places that's not the gut. And sometimes you can have severe leaky gut and feel mild symptoms, or you can have mild leaky gut that can lead to severe symptoms. So just everybody's going to be different. But my first step is to identify it and quantify it if I can, so that we know what's the time frame, how hard we have to work at it to get it back to, relative stability. And once we do that, then it's about identifying what's causing the leaky gut, if we can. Sometimes we can't identify all the factors. We can just identify a few of the factors. But if we can identify some of the main factors, such as gluten and other things, and start to work on it, eliminating these triggers, then the people might already start to do better. Now, in addition to eliminating the trigger, we also have tools and supplements and nutrition that can specifically help heal the gut lining. Some of the things that I use are, things like L-glutamine, which is an amino acid that's a fuel for the enterocyte. So basically, you give the intestinal cells more energy, then they have more energy to heal themselves, to do what they need to do to rebuild themselves. DGL, deglycyrrhizid licorice root extract, is helpful for decreasing inflammation in the gut. Aloe vera extract, marshmallow root extract, golden seal. There's various compounds, but the bottom line is there are tools that can help with that, supplemental wise. Now, I want to say, besides just taking supplements to heal the gut, we must recognize that leaky gut is an immune system problem. Okay, leaky gut is really not a gut problem per se. It's really an immune system problem that's happening within the gut, right? And then because of that, then some of the things that we use to help with leaky gut is our immune modulators, like vitamin D is actually a very important component for healing leaky gut. I use a lot of glutathione. Glutathione is going to be very important for leaky gut as well, because it helps to regulate the T regulatory cells, to modulate immune system reaction against itself. really think about leaky gut. Remember, how do we test leaky gut? It's occludin zonulin antibody, actomyosin antibody. What are these? Self-tissue. So we're measuring antibody to self-tissue. What does that look like? Autoimmune. So essentially, I'm treating leaky gut as if it's an autoimmune issue, which means I'm going to modulate the immune system with vitamin D, with glutathione, with things that are mucilaginous that can coat the gut. Like I said, L-glutamine and okra extract, aloe extract, things like that. And then we're looking for potential and other ways to dampen inflammation in the gut, potentially using turmeric, potentially using omega-3 fatty acids, resveratrol. And then we're looking for underlying trigger. If there's dysbiosis, we use natural antimicrobials to reduce that pathogenic load. If there's environmental toxin exposure, then we want to work their way toward doing detox. Maybe not right away, but as they become more stable, that is a goal or an objective we want to get to toward the later parts of the program when they are able to handle that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. So those are the things that we do to help with leaky gut. Of course, diet is really important too, right? You can't just take the supplements and still eat gluten and still eat sugar and junk and expect the supplement to work. So it's really a teamwork approach where the client and the patient has their part and we have our part. If the client's not willing to participate, not willing to, do what they need to do to help themselves get better, then, the stuff that we do is going to be a very limited, improvement for them. So.
Yeah, you can't out supplement a bad diet, full stop.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, this has been absolute gold, Dr. Kahn. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience. And, this is very, very informative to everyone listening today. Now, where can we learn more about you?
Yeah, thank you for letting me share. Thank you. So you can find me on YouTube, actually. I have a lot of free videos just out there. So you can just search Dr. Peter Kahn, K-A-N, and you'll see the bald-headed Chinese guy on YouTube. Pretty easy to narrow. Or you can go to our website at askdrkahn.com.
And I encourage everyone to check out Dr. Kahn's resources. He's got lots of them, and tune in. But listen, thanks so much, Peter. It's been a pleasure and an honor. And thank you for all that you're doing out there. And really appreciate you being on the summit today.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Have a great day.